Tywin Lannister was not a man given to outward sentiment, but in those first minutes after Tyrion was born, something in him shifted. He stood outside his wife's bedchamber, the gusts blowing in from the rocky cliffs of Casterly Rock ruffling his cloak of crimson and gold. His heart hammered. He knew the child's arrival had not gone smoothly. He feared for Joanna's life. When the midwife opened the door, Tywin pushed past with uncharacteristic haste, his eyes skimming the darkened room for his wife, for any sign of life. Joanna was pale, a sheen of sweat dampening her face, but her eyes flickered open at the sight of her husband. She looked fragile, more fragile than she ever had in their years together. Yet in her arms, nestled amid the sheets, a small bundle shifted. Tywin braced himself. He had been told the child was malformed, rumored to be an abomination that would shame their house. To Tywin Lannister, shame was a blade that cut deeply, a threat he could not abide. But when Joanna carefully lifted the child so Tywin could see, the first thing the Lord of Casterly Rock noted was that the baby was alive. Very much so, if the small, wrinkled face and flailing arms were any indication. The baby's head was too large, and the body painfully small. One leg seemed crooked, and there was a softness in his features that made him appear less robust than Jaime or Cersei had. But Tyrion had a shock of pale blonde hair on his tiny head, the same shade as Tywin's own. The baby stared up at his father with eyes that, in the dim light, looked a dark blue that might later lighten to green or remain a deeper shade. Tywin felt the slightest clutch in his chest, that flush of paternal instinct he had never expected. Perhaps he had harbored fears he would despise this child. But there was no dismissal in his face now. Instead, there was a tremor of something that might have been relief. He took his wife's hand. Joanna was exhausted, trembling from the ordeal, but the child was here, alive. And so was Joanna. "He's small," Joanna breathed, turning her wan smile upon her husband. "He needs us." Tywin reached down, touched the baby's forehead with a finger. Tyrion clung to it in reflex. A spasm of shock crossed Tywin's face. Shock that this tiny creature could stir such emotion in him. In a quiet, measured voice that carried more warmth than the midwife had ever heard, he spoke. "Then he shall have us." He did not accuse Tyrion of being a monster. He did not blame the child for the difficult birth. There was no icy withdrawal, no immediate quashing of any paternal bond. In that moment, Tywin Lannister felt a fierce determination to protect his wife and all their children. He understood that while Tyrion's size might bring ridicule, the boy was still a Lannister, and Lannisters were not scorned. The baby's future would be one of power and respect. The weeks following Tyrion's birth were full of tension as Joanna recovered slowly. During that time, Tywin was often seated by her bedside, ensuring she grew stronger. He personally supervised the maester's instructions, forcing them to tend to the slightest complaint or concern. Tyrion lay in a cradle near the bed, rarely crying, and when he did, Tywin lifted him with surprising gentleness to deliver him into Joanna's arms. Jaime and Cersei, only a few years older, eyed their brother with an understandable bewilderment. They asked questions that children asked. Jaime reached out and poked Tyrion's tiny foot. Cersei pressed her lips in a thoughtful pout whenever she saw him. She was uncertain, disliking the attention he garnered. But Tywin's word was law, and Tywin had decreed that Tyrion was his son, worthy of protection and love. Whispers rose and fell around Casterly Rock. The servants, the bannermen, the minor lords all waited to see how Tywin would react to the rumors of Tyrion's dwarfism. Yet they watched in surprise as the Lord of Casterly Rock openly carried the child through the halls with the same pride he had once displayed for Jaime. He did not flaunt the baby nor present him like a showpiece, but neither did he hide Tyrion away. He seemed to refuse the notion that Tyrion should be an object of pity or embarrassment. This was Tywin's youngest, and he demanded the same respect and courtesy from everyone. The first months of Tyrion's life were quiet, colored by the hush of Joanna's convalescence. The bright baby eyes turned from deep blue to a clearer green flecked with gold, often gazing at whoever held him with a curious intensity. Tywin would watch him in those rare private moments when he felt certain no one else was looking. He would see how Tyrion's small hands reached for the edges of a table or the folds of a cloak, how he clutched at anything that caught his interest, and how his big head wobbled on his undersized body. The boy was different, that much was clear, but a father's love, once kindled, can be as tenacious as wildfire. Perhaps Tywin did not smile broadly, nor did he speak sweet nothings, but his care was obvious to those who observed carefully. It was in the way he parted the child's thin hair when it tangled. It was in how he held Tyrion just a bit more gently than he might have, how he demanded the best crafters in the Westerlands provide the boy with specially designed chairs that would support him properly as he grew. When Joanna recovered enough strength to sit on the balcony that overlooked the sea, Tywin would join her, the infant Tyrion in his arms. He would help her sit, then place the baby in her lap. He'd stand behind them, a fortress of a man, reassuring them both. Though the environment was tough, the wind cold and the skies often overcast, there was a sense that this family had weathered a near tragedy and emerged stronger. As Tyrion grew, he struggled to walk. His legs were short, his knees easily bruised. By the time he was a toddler, his attempts to keep pace with Jaime, who often bounded around corners, wooden sword in hand, led to frequent tumbles. Cersei, meanwhile, watched her youngest brother with something akin to wariness. She could not understand her father's acceptance. She saw this small creature as a threat, not to her inheritance as a Lannister, but to her father's attention. And Tywin's attention was something Cersei valued above all else. But Tywin noticed her hesitation, recognized the seeds of resentment, and addressed it in the only way he knew: direct confrontation. One day in the courtyard, when Tyrion was almost 3, Cersei teased him, remarking on his strange proportions, calling him names Jaime could not quite pronounce. The stable boy, within earshot, snickered. Tyrion clung to the side of a barrel, tears brimming in his eyes but not falling. He gazed up at Cersei, unable to defend himself with words to match hers. That very evening, Tywin summoned Cersei into his solar. She stood before him, cheeks reddening, uncertain of what she had done to incur her father's anger. "You will not mock your brother again," Tywin told her in a voice that brooked no argument. "You are a Lannister of Casterly Rock, and Tyrion is a Lannister too. We do not tear each other down. We do not tarnish our own name. Do I make myself clear?" Cersei tried to protest, to argue that it had only been a childish jest, but Tywin's gaze held firm. She relented, bowing her head in reluctant submission. He dismissed her, and that night, Cersei lay in bed, fuming. Yet she feared her father more than she disliked Tyrion. Tyrion remained a puzzle to her. She saw how her father's stern visage softened when he looked upon the small boy. She knew that Tywin had a plan, always a plan, and she wondered if Tyrion was part of one. In her mind, the only other explanation was that her father, unfathomably, had a genuine attachment to her younger brother. Jaime, for his part, followed Tywin's lead more readily. Though Jaime had the brashness of youth, he saw in Tyrion the capacity to amuse him. The child's budding wit made Jaime laugh, and Jaime, being physically gifted, never feared a threat from Tyrion. He rather enjoyed teaching the boy small parlor tricks with daggers or spinning tales of knights and dragons. More importantly, Jaime sensed that Tywin wanted Tyrion included, wanted him to be recognized. If that was what Tywin desired, Jaime would oblige. As Tyrion advanced past his toddler years, it became clear that his mind grew far more rapidly than his limbs. He devoured scrolls, scraps of parchment, old bestiaries, and any text he could beg, borrow, or steal from the libraries of Casterly Rock. He spent long afternoons with the maesters, who marveled at his insatiable curiosity. While some might have turned a blind eye, Tywin was determined that Tyrion's intellect be harnessed for the good of the family. The Lord of Casterly Rock ensured the boy had tutors, men of learning, scribes, even visiting historians to impart knowledge of economics, politics, military tactics, and history. Where others might have hidden Tyrion away in shame, Tywin invested in him. Sitting one evening in the private reading room, Tywin observed Tyrion, now age 6, hunched over a large tome, his small legs dangling from the chair. The candlelight made the gold in his hair glimmer, and his eyes were wide, flicking across each line with intense concentration. Occasionally, Tyrion would murmur a word he didn't understand, and Tywin would answer calmly. They spoke little, but the hush that stretched between them was comfortable. When Tyrion finally closed the book, he looked up at his father. "The Field of Fire," Tyrion said, referencing the Targaryen conquest. "Aegon and his sisters used dragons to melt the combined armies of the Reach and the Rock." Tywin nodded, mildly impressed. "Yes." Tyrion peered down, scrunching his nose. "You think a dragon could ever come back? The last ones died ages ago." It said the last Targaryen dragons were pitiful creatures, small as dogs. Tywin measured his words. "But there are many things in this world people believe gone that might yet return. One must remain vigilant." Tyrion's expression lit with fascination, a brightness that revealed a childlike wonderment. "I would like to see one someday, a real dragon." Tywin, so accustomed to stoicism, almost smiled. "If ever such a beast emerges again, we shall see." The promise was half jest, half genuine, and it made Tyrion glow with excitement. Over the next few years, Tyrion grew, though not in height. His limbs remained stunted, his head still too large for his body, and a slight twist in his spine gave him an awkward gait. But what he lacked physically, he compensated for with boundless curiosity, acerbic wit, and an uncanny ability to read people's intentions. Servants who thought to mock him behind his back soon found themselves undercut in ways they could not prove were connected to Tyrion's cunning. Tywin never expressly encouraged such subtlety, but he never discouraged it either. He saw that his youngest had a mind that could be a lethal weapon if properly honed, and Tywin never shied from forging weapons for House Lannister's benefit. The bond between Tywin and Tyrion did not go unnoticed. Many of the nobles who came to pay homage at Casterly Rock were surprised to see the affection the famed Lord Tywin displayed for his dwarf son. Over time, the rumors of Tywin's monstrous child diminished, replaced by the perplexing truth that this child was bright, well-mannered when he chose to be, and beloved by his father. Whatever tension or guilt Tywin might have felt about Joanna's difficult labor remained locked away, overshadowed by the practical reality that Tyrion was a Lannister, one of Tywin's golden-haired cubs. When Tyrion reached 10, Tywin decided that Tyrion would accompany him on a visit to King's Landing for the first time. Jaime and Cersei would remain at Casterly Rock, the former continuing martial training, the latter learning courtly graces. Tyrion, however, was to be introduced to the capital's intrigues. That had been Tywin's plan, to open Tyrion's eyes to the realm beyond the Westerlands. They journeyed in a splendid litter. Tyrion asked questions non-stop, eyes glittering as they passed through villages and towns. Tywin answered with a patient thoroughness. This father-son dynamic puzzled the bannermen who traveled with them. They had known Tywin as an exacting man of few words and fewer affections. Yet with Tyrion, he displayed an unexpected willingness to talk, to teach. Arriving at King's Landing, Tyrion was overwhelmed by the crowds, the smells of fish and refuse, the clamor of countless voices. He stared up at the Red Keep's red stone walls and felt both small and enamored of the possibilities. His father brought him to the royal court, where a younger King Aerys II Targaryen, not yet fully consumed by madness, sat upon the Iron Throne. The glint of the fused swords captured Tyrion's imagination. He heard the many stories of how those blades had been melted by dragonfire. Here, in the seat of power, he could almost feel the undercurrents of politics swirling about him. Tywin, still the hand of the king at that time, was a figure of regal gravity. Courtiers bowed in his presence. Aerys, though fractious, recognized Tywin's greatness in matters of governance. Over the next weeks, Tyrion observed how his father managed the affairs of the kingdom, how he read ledgers, appointed officials, planned the collection of taxes, and handled disputes among lords. Tyrion was enthralled by the intricacy of it all, devouring details as a ravenous wolf devours meat. Tywin often found Tyrion at the end of the day, rereading notes the scribes had taken. The boy, with wide green-gold eyes, would pepper him with questions. Why did you allow the Tyrells to keep such a levy? Why not impose a new tax on the Ironborn? Why do you trust that lord's word but not the others? The father answered each query carefully. Sometimes he corrected Tyrion's misconceptions. Other times, he offered additional insight into the game of alliances. Each time, Tyrion's wits sharpened. There were moments Tywin found himself quietly amazed by the boy's ability to retain information and see solutions that might take others years to comprehend. For the first time in a long while, Tywin permitted himself a glimmer of pride. But King Aerys had not gone blind to the realm. He noticed Tyrion, dwarfed though he was, and occasionally cast the boy strange, suspicious glances. In private, Aerys asked Tywin why he paraded that malformed child in court. Tywin, stiff-spined, replied that Tyrion was his son and ward, a Lannister with the mind of a scholar and the cunning of a tactician. Aerys sneered, half dismissive, half curious. He made a disparaging remark about dwarfs in general. Tywin, for once, did not remain stoic. With a single word, "Your Grace," he had shut Aerys down, and the king, though still prone to flights of cruelty, relented. After all, Tywin was the best hand any king could ask for. He had balanced the realm's finances, elevated House Targaryen's might. Aerys recognized the value of not angering his loyal hand over so trifling an insult. During one instance in the Red Keep's library, Tyrion found himself face-to-face with Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. The silver-haired prince was older, already a young man of grace and courtesy, with a melancholic edge. Rhaegar had come to retrieve a book on prophecy and paused at the sight of the small boy perched on a stepstool, nose buried in a volume of dragon lore. The prince regarded Tyrion with gentle curiosity and asked what he was reading. Tyrion answered carefully, measuring each word in the presence of royalty. Rhaegar merely smiled and said he too loved the histories of dragons. He offered a few suggestions for further reading. Tyrion, heart pounding with equal parts excitement and nerves, nodded. In that moment, he discovered that not everyone at court viewed him as a grotesque spectacle. Their stay in the capital lasted several months. When Tywin's duties concluded, he and Tyrion returned to Casterly Rock with a small retinue. On the journey back, Tyrion was quiet, reflecting on all he had seen and learned. Tywin studied his son's face and asked, "Did King's Landing meet your expectations?" Tyrion glanced up, the corners of his mouth twitching into a hint of a grin. "It exceeded them, father. One day, I hope to serve the realm in a similar capacity as you." Tywin gave a curt nod, but there was that glimmer of approval in his eyes. "You will if you remain diligent." Back home, Jaime and Cersei asked countless questions about the capital. Tyrion tried to answer, but Cersei cut in often. Though she masked it with feigned interest, there was jealousy in her tone. How did Tyrion earn their father's favor so easily? Why had Tywin chosen him to accompany him to the seat of royal power? Jaime, by contrast, simply listened with mild awe, laughing at Tyrion's witty descriptions of King Aerys' courtiers and the endless gossip that filled those halls. As the years rolled on, Tyrion blossomed into a youth with a staggering intellect and, under Tywin's watchful eye, a growing grasp of strategy and politics. But the realm grew darker too. King Aerys' madness deepened, culminating in the onset of Robert's rebellion after the disappearance of Lyanna Stark and the deaths at Harrenhal's tourney fiasco. The Targaryen reign teetered on the brink of collapse. Tywin remained in Casterly Rock for a time, waiting to see which way the wind would blow before committing his forces. Tyrion was around 14 or 15 then, old enough to understand the implications of war, old enough to read the dread in the letters that arrived daily. Jaime, already a knight in the Kingsguard, wrote sporadically to Tywin, sharing concerns about the king's erratic behavior. Cersei, betrothed in Tywin's mind to Rhaegar or another scion of power, felt increasingly anxious about her future. Tyrion, gleaning details from each snippet of conversation, concluded that the realm was about to fracture. He spent hours with Tywin in the audience chambers, discussing the strategic value of pledging the Westerlands to one side or the other. When Robert Baratheon won victory after victory against the Targaryens, Tywin bided his time. The sacking of King's Landing was a decisive moment, one that, in another timeline, might have been overshadowed by bitterness. Yet here, Tywin weighed the cost and concluded that a grand gesture of loyalty to the new king was necessary. He led the Lannister host to King's Landing under the white flag of friendship, only to open the gates and let his men plunder the city in Robert's name. Even then, Tywin dispatched Tyrion to remain at Casterly Rock, safe from the chaos. Had Tyrion asked to accompany his father? Indeed, he had, but Tywin forbade it. "You are too precious to risk in a city about to fall. This war is nearly ended, but it will be bloody yet." And so Tyrion stood upon the high walls of Casterly Rock and watched the horizon for ravens. Each day he read the dispatches, trying to piece together the puzzle of the rebellion's final acts. The war ended with House Targaryen overthrown, Robert crowned king, and Tywin welcomed as one of the major architects of the new order. Jaime returned from the capital a changed man, haunted by what he had done. He had slain King Aerys to prevent the destruction of the city, a deed that stained him with the moniker of Kingslayer. Tyrion greeted his brother with open arms, expecting perhaps to find the same cocksure Jaime. But Jaime wore a solemnity that Tyrion had never seen before. Tywin took note as well. In private, Tywin spoke with Jaime and assured him that he had done the realm a service, though few would ever recognize it. Jaime, uncertain of his father's judgment, found a measure of relief that he was not disowned or censured. In the years that followed, Tywin returned to Casterly Rock, serving the new King Robert from afar. Cersei was wed to Robert in short order, becoming Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. Tyrion remained in the Westerlands, continuing his studies and occasionally venturing to court with his father. He learned to navigate the treacherous waters of King Robert's rule, observing how the alliances shifted, how the new king indulged in feasts, hunts, and tournaments, often neglecting governance. Little by little, Tyrion gleaned that real power often lay in the hands of those who whispered in the king's ear. Tywin had been that figure once for the Mad King. Now he advised Robert from time to time, and as always, the realm's finances fell to Lannister gold when the crown's coffers ran short. Unlike another path that might have happened, Tywin never openly humiliated Tyrion. He never considered forcing the boy into the shadowy corners of the rock or sending him away. No, Tyrion was his son and had proven himself invaluable in small ways already. Tywin had him manage local disputes, watch over trade routes, even oversee the building of a new port facility. The boy's cunning shone in each of these tasks, and though physically he struggled to climb or ride for extended periods, he made up for it with a passion for detail. Yet not all was placid within the family. Cersei, now queen, resented how Tywin took pride in Tyrion's mind, consulting him about matters of coin and governance. She felt overshadowed, as if her own father valued the dwarf's counsel more than hers. When she visited Casterly Rock, or when Tyrion came to King's Landing, she rarely missed an opportunity to belittle him, albeit more subtly now, never in their father's presence. In an attempt to preserve some bond, Tyrion tried small courtesies, flattery even, but Cersei rebuffed him. She had grown up believing that a dwarf brother was a mark of shame. Her father's acceptance of Tyrion never fully dispelled her own prejudices. She could mask her disdain, but she nurtured it quietly. Jaime, for his part, was more affable, seeing Tyrion as an amusing companion. Yet the years of kingslaying guilt weighed on him. He could be distant at times, lost in self-reflection. Tyrion recognized that Jaime's flamboyant confidence had been replaced by a sort of practiced performance. Beneath it lurked an ever-present shame. Tyrion, with an uncanny knack for empathy, listened when Jaime did choose to speak. He tried to reassure his brother that history would be kinder in time, that Aerys' madness would be remembered. But Jaime shrugged off such comforts. He suspected the world would never forget the Kingslayer. When Tyrion reached his 20th name day, Tywin hosted a grand feast at Casterly Rock. Nobles from across the Westerlands and beyond came to pay respects. It was a testament that Tywin did not consider Tyrion a secret to be hidden, but a son worthy of celebration. Tyrion, never one to shirk a party, indulged in the fine wines jested with guests, and soaked in the music. His father rarely showed warmth in public, but that night he offered a toast, acknowledging Tyrion's intelligence and value to the family. The crowd, taken aback, clapped politely. Tyrion met his father's gaze and raised his own cup. There was a moment of silent gratitude in his eyes. As he drank, he felt an odd pang in his chest. Though he had grown used to Tywin's quiet acceptance, the formal recognition under so many watchful eyes felt like a confirmation of everything Tyrion had hoped for. But life in the Seven Kingdoms was never still. The uneasy peace that followed Robert's rebellion eventually began to crack with tensions rising in the north, rumors of Targaryen survivors across the Narrow Sea, and the king's own extravagances depleting the treasury. Tywin's gold propped up the crown more than ever, though the official record showed the crown in staggering debt to House Lannister. Tyrion watched the ledgers, seeing the balances shift, the interest accrue. He realized that Robert's squandering might eventually give House Lannister immense leverage or drag them into chaos. He wrote detailed analyses showing Tywin the potential outcomes. Tywin considered them all, always planning, always vigilant. Then came the death of Jon Arryn, the King's Hand, and King Robert's fateful decision to ride north to name Ned Stark as Arryn's replacement. The entire realm felt a tremor of uncertainty. Tywin dispatched Tyrion to King's Landing, instructing him to keep an eye on the situation. "We must know where Stark's loyalties lie and how Robert's moods shift," Tywin said. "Keep your ears open. See what the Queen is doing." Tyrion understood the subtext. Keep an eye on Cersei too. Ensure she was not leading the crown astray. So Tyrion traveled, arriving at King's Landing in the late heat of summer. He moved into the Tower of the Hand, though the newly arrived Ned Stark resided there officially. Tyrion found other accommodations within the Red Keep, a modest suite near the Maegor's Holdfast. He watched from the sidelines as the politics of court churned. Ned Stark took up the badge of the Hand reluctantly, trying to impose some sense of order on Robert's excessive lifestyle. Cersei maneuvered to protect her children's interests, especially the willful Joffrey. Tyrion saw the interplay of the small council. Peter Baelish's sly ambition, Varys's network of whispers, Pycelle's slipperiness, and Renly Baratheon's youthful flamboyance. Being the son of the Lord of Casterly Rock, Tyrion was granted courtesy and respect at court, though behind his back, many still snickered at his stature. That hardly bothered him. He listened in corners, asked pointed questions, and gathered bits of intel. In the evenings, he wrote letters to his father. Tywin occasionally replied with terse instructions or advice. One letter in particular arrived that read, "Trust the wolf's honor, but watch the queen's cunning." Tyrion recognized that Tywin, for all his paternal warmth toward Tyrion, still viewed Cersei's thirst for influence with caution. Events escalated when Bran Stark fell from the tower at Winterfell, and rumors spread of Lannister involvement. Tyrion, maintaining his father's stance, defended the family name at court. Yet privately he pressed Cersei and Jaime for the truth. Jaime evaded. Cersei fumed that Tyrion should keep his nose out of it. Tension within the family built. Ned Stark, suspecting Lannister treachery, began investigating. Tyrion could sense the situation unraveling, but he lacked the authority to quell it outright. When war broke out after Ned Stark was seized for confronting Cersei, Tywin finally marched his armies. But there was a difference from another timeline. Tywin instructed Tyrion to remain in King's Landing, to try and negotiate or at least mitigate the conflicts that were bound to arise. "You have the mind for it," Tywin wrote. "Use that mind to keep the crown from destroying itself and us with it." Tyrion obeyed, though not without concern for his own safety. Tensions soared. King Robert died under suspicious circumstances, and Joffrey took the throne. Ned Stark was executed. The North rose in rebellion under Robb Stark. War spread across the Riverlands. Throughout this, Tyrion strove to maintain a sense of diplomatic calm. He built rapport with Varys, swapped jests with Littlefinger, seeking ways to keep the lines of communication open. But Joffrey's cruelty and Cersei's iron control over him left Tyrion with limited sway. When Tywin recognized that King's Landing might fall to Stannis Baratheon or Renly if a strong hand did not guide the boy king, he made Tyrion the acting hand of the king, sending a raven from the field. This was a significant departure from some rumored plan to send Tyrion off as a scapegoat. Instead, Tywin recognized that Tyrion was the only one with both the cunning and the loyalty to House Lannister to keep Joffrey in check and protect their family's interests. It was with no small measure of apprehension that Tyrion took on the badge of the Hand. He was, after all, a dwarf in a city that despised him, serving a nephew who seemed to inherit the worst traits of a spoiled princeling. Yet Tywin's faith in him was something he could not dismiss. Tyrion arrived at the Red Keep's throne room wearing the Hand's chain, his head held high, ignoring the whispers. Cersei glared at him, certain he would try to usurp her authority. Tyrion only smiled. "Sister, I am here to help." Those were the words he spoke, but they were laced with layers of meaning. The tumultuous months that followed tested Tyrion's fortitude. He clashed with Cersei often over how to handle the city's unrest, the debts owed to the Iron Bank, and the threats from Stannis's fleet. He discovered that the city's stores of wildfire were more extensive than anyone realized. Remembering his father's lessons about cunning and the advantage of intimidation, Tyrion engineered a trap for Stannis, using the wildfire to devastate his ships as they sailed into Blackwater Bay. The Battle of the Blackwater was a triumph for the Lannisters in the end, though it came at the cost of chaos in the streets. Tyrion was wounded in the fighting but survived. In the aftermath, King Joffrey and Queen Regent Cersei took much of the credit, overshadowing Tyrion's brilliance. But Tywin, arriving in the city as the victor with the Tyrell alliance, made it clear whom he believed had saved them all. Tywin, astride his warhorse, found Tyrion recuperating in a lavish bedchamber. Tyrion's face was bruised, a stitched gash across his brow where Ser Mandon Moore had tried to kill him in the heat of battle. Tywin sat beside his son, not a typical show of paternal affection, but a private moment that Tyrion cherished all the same. "You acquitted yourself well," Tywin said, his voice quiet. "I knew you would. You are a Lannister, and you have proven worthy of that name time and again." Tyrion, weak from the maester's potions, managed a thin smile. "I only did what was necessary, father." Tywin nodded. He reached out to place a hand on Tyrion's arm, a gesture so uncharacteristic that Tyrion almost flinched. "Yes, you always do." In that soft moment, Tyrion felt the wave of relief that all his efforts, all his cunning, had earned the approval he had sought since childhood. If only, he thought, his siblings could share in it without resentment. Despite these successes, the intrigues of King's Landing would not relent. Peter Baelish schemed, ensuring his own rise to power. Varys continued whispering of Targaryens across the sea. The Tyrells secured their position through Marjorie's betrothal to King Joffrey. Tyrion was moved aside in official capacity when Tywin took the mantle of Hand again. Yet the father did not discard the son. Tyrion was given a role as Master of Coin, an official seat on the small council, presumably to manage the crown's finances. Littlefinger's departure for the Vale left the role vacant. Tyrion suspected it was also a test. Tywin wanted to see if his son could handle the labyrinth of debts the crown had accrued. Tyrion accepted, though he loathed the idea of balancing ledgers with so many more pressing issues. In truth, Tyrion's mind was better suited to the game of courtly politics than to the minutiae of coin, but he tackled the task with diligence. He discovered the crown owed colossal sums to the Iron Bank, and further sums to House Lannister itself. Tywin occasionally pressed him for updates, ensuring that House Lannister remained secure. Tyrion did his best, forging new trade deals, raising tariffs in ways that didn't spark immediate rebellion. Slowly, the ledger lines began to shift for the better. Had Cersei recognized the service Tyrion was providing, she might have softened. But she took every success as a personal slight, believing Tyrion was angling to outdo her. Their arguments in council chambers became the stuff of rumor and jest throughout the city. When news arrived that Robb Stark had scored victories in the field against Lannister bannermen, Tywin and Tyrion joined forces to plan strategy. Tywin orchestrated the infamous Red Wedding with Walder Frey's cooperation and Roose Bolton's betrayal. Tyrion was kept in partial ignorance of the bloodier details, though he gleaned enough to suspect something ruthless was afoot. He confronted his father one afternoon, behind closed doors in Tywin's private chambers. "You plan to crush Stark, but at what cost to our family's honor?" Tyrion asked, heart pounding with moral conflict. Tywin's voice was cold. "Honor cannot keep us safe. If Robb Stark's rebellion continues, the realm bleeds. This must end." Tyrion swallowed, his mouth dry. "He is an honorable foe, and that is precisely why he is dangerous." Tywin cut in. "There is no place for honor in a war that would see our house brought low. We are lions, Tyrion. We do not bow to wolves. The Red Wedding will end the northern threat once and for all." Tyrion closed his eyes briefly. The father he loved, the father who had nurtured him, was also capable of chilling ruthlessness. But perhaps that was the price of their survival. Tyrion found it bitter. He said nothing more on the matter. The Red Wedding took place, sealing House Stark's fate in a bloody betrayal. Robb Stark was slain, his mother too, and the Riverlands descended into chaos. Tywin proclaimed victory, and many a Lannister bannerman rejoiced. The throne in King's Landing felt more secure than ever. Tyrion, though revolted by the brutality of the act, recognized that for all its cruelty, it had ended the war swiftly. He kept his doubts and disgust private. He did not want to incur the wrath of his father or place further strain on their bond. But the cosmos has a way of balancing scales. Soon, Prince Oberyn Martell arrived in King's Landing, seeking justice for the murder of his sister Elia and her children during the sack of King's Landing all those years ago. Tensions between House Martell and House Lannister simmered, and Tyrion was caught in the crossfire. The fiasco with Sansa Stark's forced marriage to Tyrion took place at Tywin's behest, a move to control the North's claim. Tyrion, pitying Sansa, treated her kindly, but she remained frightened and grieved by the slaughter of her family. Their marriage was never consummated, Tyrion refusing to force himself on a girl who despised him. This marital arrangement only deepened Cersei's hostility. She ridiculed Tyrion's inability to secure the match in the way Tywin intended, by producing a child that would unite House Lannister with the North. Tyrion, pained by the cruelty inflicted on Sansa, also found himself at odds with his father over the plan's callous disregard for the girl's feelings. Yet Tywin, while stern, did not disown Tyrion. He simply demanded results. "We must tie the North to us by blood, and you are best positioned to do it." Tyrion could not bring himself to comply. The wedge between father and son expanded slightly, but it did not shatter their bond. Tyrion remained torn between his loyalty to House Lannister and his own moral compass. A chain of misfortune then struck. King Joffrey died at his own wedding feast, a victim of poison. The city roiled with rumors and accusations. Cersei, in her fury, seized upon Tyrion as the scapegoat. She demanded his arrest, proclaiming that only he could have orchestrated such a cunning murder. Tywin, to preserve order, allowed Tyrion to stand trial, trusting the law of the realm to exonerate him if he was truly innocent. But the trial quickly descended into a farce, with false witnesses and manipulated testimonies. Cersei used every resource at her disposal to see Tyrion condemned. In the darkest hour, Tyrion looked to his father for rescue. But Tywin, pressed by the Tyrells and anxious to maintain the alliance, let the trial proceed with the knowledge that a guilty verdict might placate the Tyrells. He intended to commute Tyrion's sentence to the wall, a compromise that would save Tyrion's life and keep the peace in King's Landing. Tyrion, shattered by the betrayal he felt from his sister and from a father who did not openly champion him, demanded trial by combat. The rest was set in motion. Oberyn Martell championed Tyrion, seeking to prove Gregor Clegane's guilt for Elaya's murder. In a tragic twist, Oberyn was killed, and Tyrion's guilt was all but sealed in the eyes of the court. After Oberyn's gruesome defeat, Tyrion was declared guilty and sentenced to death. Tywin, behind closed doors, arranged for Jaime to help Tyrion escape the dungeons before the execution. This plan, Tywin believed, was a carefully orchestrated mercy. He had no intention of actually allowing Tyrion to die, not after everything. The entire show was a political maneuver to satisfy the Tyrells and the Martells. But in the final hours of Tyrion's confinement, the truth came out. Shae, Tyrion's former lover, had been enticed to betray him in court. Fueled by heartbreak, anger, and a sense of utter betrayal, Tyrion followed the secret passages to his father's chambers. He found Shae there in Tywin's bed. Some stories might say it was purely lust or convenience that brought her there. In truth, it might have been Tywin's attempt to keep her silent or out of harm's way, an ill-advised act that Tyrion could only interpret as the gravest of betrayals. In a fit of rage and despair, Tyrion strangled Shae. Then he confronted his father, crossbow in hand. Tywin, surprised but not entirely uncomposed, rose from the privy. He tried to reason with Tyrion, to explain that the trial had been a ruse, that he intended to spare Tyrion's life, that Shae's presence was not a condemnation of Tyrion but a foolish mistake. Tyrion, tears burning in his eyes, demanded to know why Tywin had allowed everything to reach this point, why he could not have intervened openly to save Tyrion from humiliation, why he risked Tyrion's life in a gamble of politics. Tywin, his voice taut, answered that sometimes it was necessary to appear severe in order to maintain the family's power, that every step he had taken was to keep House Lannister strong. Tyrion's hands shook on the crossbow's trigger. He remembered a lifetime of paternal guidance, acceptance, love, yet also the shadows of ambition and ruthlessness that had overshadowed them. He thought of Sansa, of the Red Wedding, of Shae's betrayal. His father looked upon him not with hatred, but with something akin to regret. Tyrion's fury boiled over. Before he could stop himself, he squeezed the trigger. The bolt struck Tywin in the chest. Tywin gasped, staggering back against the chamber wall. Blood seeped into his fine linen nightclothes. Tyrion froze, realizing what he had done. For a moment, father and son locked eyes. The anger in Tyrion's face flickered into horror. Tywin tried to speak, but only managed a rattle of breath. Tyrion, tears slipping down his cheeks, took an involuntary step forward. He had never intended this outcome. He wanted answers, wanted his father to understand the pain he had caused. But in that single moment of reckless rage, Tyrion had undone the bond of a lifetime. Tywin slid down the wall, eyes dimming, all his formidable presence bleeding away. Tyrion felt as though a sword had been driven into his own heart. Every memory, every instance of paternal approval, every piece of paternal affection rushed through his mind. He choked out a strangled sob. He knew he could not stay. Soldiers would come. He fled, tears blurring his vision. Jaime's help spirited him out of the city. He left behind everything he had once hoped to preserve. In the aftermath, chaos reigned in King's Landing. Tywin Lannister, the Great Lion, was dead. The question of succession and regency for young King Tommen erupted. Cersei took the reins of power, seizing control in her father's absence, harboring a burning hatred for Tyrion, who had killed their father. She blamed him for every ill that had befallen their family, but she did not know the full truth, that Tywin had genuinely loved Tyrion, in his way, and had risked all to protect him. Jaime wrestled with his own guilt, having set Tyrion free. The city, already battered by war, felt a chill of uncertainty. Far away, aboard a ship bound for the free cities, Tyrion huddled in a cramped cabin. His soul felt hollow, devoured by remorse. He recalled the nights his father had read to him, the days he spent learning the intricacies of power at Tywin's side, the paternal pride that glowed behind Tywin's measured gaze. Tyrion had shattered the one relationship that had given him any real belonging. In the gloom of the ship's hold, he drank himself into oblivion, nightmares haunting him of his father's last breath. Yet on storm-tossed seas, a new determination slowly grew in Tyrion. He could not undo his crime. He had slain the man who raised him, the man who had defied the stigma of dwarfism and insisted the world respect him as a Lannister. But that very father had also orchestrated cruel deeds that stained their house and the realm. Tyrion's mind reeled with conflicting emotions. Perhaps, he reasoned bitterly, Tywin had truly loved him. Yet love and ambition made a toxic brew. Tyrion did not know if he could ever forgive himself. But the love that he and Tywin had shared was not undone by a single arrow. It was merely consumed by the harsh reality that political games can warp even the strongest bonds. Thus began Tyrion's exile. He traveled through Pentos, meeting Illyrio Mopatis, who nursed him with offers of wine and riddles of Targaryen restoration. Tyrion drifted in a fog, uncertain of his purpose. He had known one anchor in life, House Lannister, and specifically his father's guarded, stoic love. Now that was lost. Over time, he heard news from across the narrow sea: Cersei's paranoid rule, the High Sparrow's rise, Jaime's missions to reclaim the Riverlands, the faint whispers of a queen in the east with dragons. He recalled Tywin's words, "One must remain vigilant. Some things believed gone may yet return." In his darkest hours, Tyrion considered taking his own life. But something deep within him refused to yield. A fierce sense of survival kindled, born of Tywin's teachings. If he possessed nothing else, he possessed his mind. And he knew his father would have expected him to use it, not waste it. Slowly, Tyrion found a new kind of resolve. He could not return to King's Landing without facing certain death. Nor could he ally with the likes of Cersei. But perhaps he could find another path, one that might lend meaning to his father's legacy and his own battered conscience. When he heard of Daenerys Targaryen in Meereen, a breaker of chains and mother of dragons, he recognized an opportunity. In another life, he might have dismissed a Targaryen claimant. But Tywin had taught him the importance of forging timely alliances, and Tyrion knew all too well the crown's weaknesses. He made the journey east, eventually maneuvering his way into Daenerys' council, offering his knowledge of Westeros. She saw a broken, cynical man, but also glimpsed a brilliant strategist. Over time, Tyrion earned her ear, if not yet her full trust. At night, in the gloom of Meereen's warm nights, Tyrion would stare into a cup of wine and reflect on Tywin. He remembered the Lord of Casterly Rock standing tall on the battlements, arms folded, cold wind in his golden hair, telling him that a man needed to command respect, that a Lannister must never bow in shame. Tyrion remembered the quiet nights in the library, father and son discussing the conquests of Aegon Targaryen, how cunning and force could reshape kingdoms. He reflected on how Tywin had tried to shape him into an instrument of power, yet had also shown him genuine care, the kind that had sustained Tyrion through every insult and slight. The war in Meereen, the struggle for Daenerys' claim, the battles against the slavers and the sons of the Harpy, all demanded Tyrion's focus. He rose as a key advisor in the Targaryen court, bridging a gap between an exiled queen and a realm he knew intimately. If Tywin had not died by his hand, if the old lion had lived, perhaps a Lannister-Targaryen alliance would have been forged in a more official capacity. But now, Tyrion found himself forging alliances in the shadows, chasing a redemption he barely believed possible. Daenerys eventually sailed west with her armies and dragons, Tyrion by her side, returning to the Seven Kingdoms to press her claim. Tyrion stood on the deck of her flagship, gazing out at the churning waters. The salt air stung his eyes. He felt a strange mix of nostalgia and dread at the thought of seeing the shores of Westeros again. If they succeeded, he would be pitted against the remnants of House Lannister, his own kin. Jaime might be forced to fight him. Cersei would surely want him dead. Yet Tyrion resolved to see it through. He had nowhere else to stand, no cause but the cause he had chosen. In his heart, he carried the memory of a father who had once taught him duty, cunning, and the pride of lions. Landing in Dragonstone, Tyrion took measure of the old Targaryen fortress, feeling the swirl of ancient power in its volcanic stone. He helped Daenerys plan her campaign, forging alliances with Dorne and the Reach. The Ironborn brought ships under Yara Greyjoy. The Unsullied disciplined the Dothraki fierce. Tyrion advised caution, remembering the lessons Tywin had instilled. Never overextend, never rely on single points of failure. But the presence of dragons changed every calculation, and Tyrion marveled at the living weapons Daenerys commanded. Cersei, ever formidable, fortified King's Landing, forging uneasy truces with Euron Greyjoy, massing wildfire reserves. Tyrion felt a chill recalling that dreadful green flame. He, more than most, understood the carnage it could unleash. He urged Daenerys to avoid a direct assault on the city that would repeat the horrors of the sack or the Battle of the Blackwater. They needed a surgical approach, force surrender without leveling the capital. Daenerys, determined to rule with a gentle hand, listened. Yet her impatience grew. She had dragons, she had armies, and she saw fear as a potent tool. When the final confrontation came, Tyrion stood upon a rise overlooking the golden sprawl of King's Landing. Daenerys' forces encircled the city. Dragons wheeled overhead. Tyrion swallowed hard, recalling the day years ago he had arrived in that same city with his father, hoping to learn the ways of power. He had never dreamed he would stand here as part of a force threatening to topple the Lannister seat of power. He tried to focus, to keep Daenerys from unleashing her wrath. The city gates did not open at first. Then, under a white flag, Jaime Lannister rode out. He sought parley in the name of Queen Cersei. Tyrion went to speak with Jaime, heart pounding. The reunion of brothers was fraught. Jaime looked older, lines of care etched into his once handsome face. Tyrion's eyes were sharp, his mouth set. Jaime explained that Cersei would never surrender to the Targaryen usurper, that she would burn the city down before relinquishing her throne. Tyrion pleaded with Jaime to reason with her, to arrange a bloodless transition of power. The realm had seen too much war. Jaime pressed his lips together, wrestling with his loyalty to family and his sense of decency. He asked Tyrion why he fought for Daenerys. Tyrion had no simple answer beyond the truth. He believed Daenerys could break the wheel of tyrants, that she might offer a chance for a better realm, that he had no place else to go. Jaime returned to the city, uncertain. When the next dawn broke, the gates opened, and the city guard threw down their arms. Word spread that Jaime had convinced Cersei to flee rather than set King's Landing ablaze. Tyrion and Daenerys' forces marched in unopposed, taking the Red Keep with minimal bloodshed. Tyrion could scarcely believe that Jaime had succeeded. On the Iron Throne's dais, Daenerys was proclaimed Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. Tyrion stood at her side, half in awe, half in dread of what came next. He soon discovered that Cersei had indeed fled, taking her younger children with her. She remained at large, a lioness in exile. Jaime, torn by conflicting loyalties, had stayed behind, wanting to see if Daenerys would truly be a just ruler. Tyrion embraced his brother, relieved and shaken. The city was subdued, not sacked. Fewer innocents died. Tyrion believed his father would have approved of the cunning negotiation. Yet a pang of sadness filled him, knowing Tywin would never see this new order. Some said the new queen's rule was not secure, that pockets of resistance would remain. Tyrion was named Hand of the Queen, ironically stepping into the same role his father had once held for Aerys and Robert. Standing in the Tower of the Hand, Tyrion allowed himself a moment to recall Tywin's methodical brilliance, how he handled crises, how he balanced alliances. He vowed to do better, to avoid the pitfalls of cruelty. But he also resolved to uphold a firm justice, for the realm was fragile. Over time, Daenerys tried to stabilize the kingdom. She offered pardons, established new lines of trade, restructured the crown's debts. Tyrion guided her, occasionally clashing with her impulses, but providing wise counsel. The memory of Tywin's lessons served him well. Jaime became a general in her armies, though he wore the regret of a lost sister. Some whispered that Cersei Lannister might yet gather strength in the Westerlands for a final stand. Tyrion knew that confrontation might come one day, and his heart was weary at the thought. But for now, the realm took a tentative breath of peace. In private, Tyrion had a small shrine built in the keep's library to house his father's signet ring. Though Tywin had been buried in the Great September, Tyrion kept the ring as a personal relic. He would sometimes stand there late at night, turning the golden lion ring over in his hand, lost in recollections. He saw the father who once stood at his mother's bedside, refusing to abandon his dwarf child. He saw the father who oversaw his education, who gave him worth when the world mocked him. He saw also the father who orchestrated massacre, who forced a child into a marriage with a traumatized girl, who risked his son's life at trial for the sake of politics. Tywin Lannister was a paradox, a man of fierce paternal love, yet also capable of blood-stained pragmatism. Tyrion recognized that in so many ways he was Tywin's son, shrewd, pragmatic, determined. But he was also something more, someone shaped by empathy and a sense of humor that Tywin never truly possessed. Perhaps that was Joanna's influence, or perhaps it was the unique struggle of growing up different. Tyrion resolved to use his father's lessons to serve a queen who promised change, hoping that he might steer her away from tyrannical impulses. In doing so, he believed he honored the best part of Tywin's legacy, the unwavering dedication to preserving what one held dear. Seasons shifted. The Long Night's rumored threat emerged from the north, and Daenerys, now allied with Jon Snow, marched her armies to confront the White Walkers. Tyrion traveled with her, reuniting with the Stark survivors in Winterfell. He felt the cold stares of those who remembered the Lannisters' role in the Red Wedding, who recalled Ned Stark's execution. Once more, Tyrion was the outsider, the dwarf from the south. But he found ways to bridge the gap, forging uneasy truces. In the great battle against the dead, Tyrion's strategic mind helped coordinate defenses, ballista placements, and the storage of dragonglass. Though the war was horrific and cost many lives, the living prevailed. And in the victory feasts that followed, Tyrion raised a cup in honor of lost heroes and absent friends. Silently, he thought of Tywin, for the old lion had prepared him well for times of peril. In the aftermath of the undead threat, the kingdom faced the final question of unification. Daenerys and Jon struggled to define their relationship and claims. Factions whispered of secrets regarding Jon's parentage. Tyrion, once more, found himself at the heart of swirling intrigues. He tried to balance the realm's need for stability with the personal conflicts of the leaders. Ultimately, a council was convened to decide the future. Tyrion spoke passionately for a governance that would not repeat the cycles of tyranny. Daenerys, wounded by betrayals and the toll of war, listened but remained wary. Jon Snow, torn by duty and love, could not articulate a single path that satisfied all. Eventually, an accord was reached. Some claimed it was partly the fruit of Tyrion's skillful negotiation. The North would have a measure of autonomy under a revived kingdom in the North. Daenerys would rule the remaining 6 kingdoms, forging alliances through progressive reforms. The dragons, battered by conflict, remained a looming reminder of the Queen's might. Tyrion, in the role of hand, promised to steer the realm toward reconstruction, ensuring the scars of war healed if possible. In that moment, he might have recalled Tywin's capacity for order, for building roads and ports, for restoring a kingdom after rebellion. He took a deep breath and set his resolve. He would try to outdo his father in the realm of mercy, though he would never match Tywin's iron will in matters of retribution. And so the years moved on. Tyrion oversaw the rebuilding of King's Landing's battered walls, the re-establishment of commerce in the Crownlands, the renegotiation of debts with the Iron Bank. He occasionally exchanged letters with Jaime, who traveled the realm as a knight once more, seeking redemption for the bloody deeds of his past. Of Cersei, there were only rumors that she had died in hiding, or that she roamed the free cities incognito, plotting vengeance. Tyrion, weary of old ghosts, hoped never to encounter her again. Yet he knew the wheel of fate never ceased turning. Each time Tyrion found himself in the Red Keep's council chamber, signing edicts or hearing petitions, he glimpsed the faint reflection of Tywin Lannister in himself. Hard decisions came across his desk: harsh taxes, potential crackdowns on rebellious lords, expansions of the City Watch. Sometimes, to preserve the Queen's authority, harsh measures were necessary. In these moments, Tyrion's quill hovered, and he recalled the cold logic of House Lannister: survival above all. He would sign, but he did so with caution, keenly aware of the cost. Perhaps that was the difference between father and son. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky over Blackwater Bay in streaks of red and gold, Tyrion walked alone along the battlements. He paused at a spot overlooking the city. It was near the ramparts where he had once orchestrated the defense against Stannis Baratheon's fleet. A swirl of memory threatened to choke him. He closed his eyes, recalling the crackle of wildfire, the roar of flames. He could almost see Tywin riding through the city gates in triumph after the battle. Could almost feel the hand on his shoulder as his father told him he had done well. That paternal approval had been his anchor, even if it had come from a man capable of great cruelty. A deep sadness tinged his reverie. He did not regret everything that had happened, only that it had ended in violence and betrayal. He imagined a different path, where father and son might have worked side by side to rebuild the realm under a just ruler, forging alliances with measured cunning, bridging old wounds with wise concessions. But the Game of Thrones was never so forgiving. Tywin's unwavering focus on power had led them both down a path of bloodshed. Tyrion exhaled slowly, lifting his gaze to the fiery sky. "Father," he murmured under his breath, "I hope wherever you are, you can see that your son is trying." The wind carried his words away. There was no answer, save the distant call of gulls. For a moment, Tyrion allowed himself to imagine Tywin's face softening with a rare flicker of pride. Perhaps that was foolish. Tywin, even in death, might have scolded him for indulging in sentiment. But Tyrion smiled faintly, because he knew better than anyone that beneath his father's steel exterior, there had been a reservoir of love, deep, if not warm, abiding, if never truly gentle. With that thought, he turned from the battlements and made his way down into the keep, where the business of ruling awaited him. He was Tyrion of House Lannister, dwarf, hand of the queen, and in the quiet recesses of his soul, the beloved son of Tywin. No matter how haunted he was by the final tragedy that sundered their bond, he could not forget that for many years he had known a father's devotion, had been nurtured and recognized as worthy. That alone had shaped him into the man he was. And though the realm might never understand the complexity of their relationship, Tyrion carried the memory forward, forging a future in which the best of Tywin's legacy would live on through him.